Some critics of President Trump say he is responsible for creating a divisive atmosphere that has led to politically motivated violence. In a tweet Monday morning, the president pushed back on that criticism and said the media was responsible for Republicans being blamed for division and hatred. But at the White House Friday and in Indiana Saturday, President Trump condemned recent acts of violence and called for national unity.
These terrorizing acts are despicable and have no place in our country. We must never allow political violence to take root in America. Cannot let it happen. And I'm committed to doing everything in my power as president to stop it. And to stop it now. To stop it now. We must all rise above the hate, move past our divisions, and embrace our common destiny as Americans. And it doesn't mean that we can't fight hard and be strong and say what's on our mind, but we have to always remember those elements. We have to remember the elements of love and dignity and respect and so many others.
At Monday's White House briefing, Press Secretary Sarah Sanders also responded to criticism of the president. She defended his response to recent acts of violence.
The very first action that the president did was condemn these heinous acts. The very first thing that the media did was condemn the president and go after and try to place blame, not just on the president, but everybody that works in this administration. The major news networks' first public statement was to blame the president, and myself included. I mean, that is outrageous that anybody other than the individual who carried out the crime would hold that responsibility.
And joining me now is Washington Post reporter David Nakamura, who recently took a look at why critics accuse the president of fostering political violence. David, thanks for being with us. When critics say that the president's rhetoric has fostered a toxic environment, what exactly do they point to? Are there exact words that he's using?
Certainly. I mean, just look at the past 10 days or so where you had the president really focusing on what he called a national security crisis, a big threat to public safety, which he was pointing to this migrant caravan of thousands of migrants from Central America who are traveling by foot far from the U.S. border. Yes, they're traveling north, but it's not clear they'll even reach the United States, or if so, how many would. And many of them are family and children. He was calling that a security threat, suggesting there were terrorists and criminals within that group without offering significant or any evidence, really. He acknowledged he didn't have evidence for that. But he talked about it in dramatic terms and ramped up a response with the military. We're seeing today even more military troops going to the border. And then you had these mail bomb plot and the mass shooting. And folks are saying the president is not condemning this kind of violence. Yes, he did in these specific cases, but over the years, extremist acts, extremist statements, and the way that a president typically has in the past. And, of course, we've seen violent acts in the past, but the question for the president is about leadership and about whether he's setting a certain kind of tone, an aspirational tone for the country. Words itself are not going to do much. Policies matter, too. But the president has taken a lot of criticism that he has just added to this sort of inflammatory culture we have, to false news, to misstatements, mistruth, and a real fraying of the public, bond that, could create even more of a crisis situation in the country now. And people saying basically that this threat is far greater than whatever threat this migrant caravan may pose.
And is there any argument that it's not just President Trump, though, who has contributed to this climate, but also Democrats in the way they've responded to the president's rhetoric?
To some degree, yes, and I think both sides acknowledge that. There's other contributing factors as well, our social media and, false news propagated by even foreign governments, and including Russia and others, as we saw in 2016. I think the question, though, is that the president's words carry a lot of weight no matter who the president is, no matter which party is in power. That's the highest elected official, the leader of the free world, the most powerful person in the country. And this president in particular has made a number of questionable statements. We remember, of course, after the violence in Charlottesville last year at the white supremacist rally, the president saying there are fine people on both sides, then seemed to walk that back before doubling down on the statement again after he didn't feel like he got enough credit for trying to rise above it and condemn the white supremacists. More recently, he's talked about, conspiracy theories about, threats against white South African farmers. His Twitter account has retweeted, questionable accounts as well from extremist views.
Well, also, David, he's recently called himself a proud nationalist in opposition to a globalist. He's painted that as sort of a negative thing. And for some on the fringe, when they hear the word globalist, it can also mean, a Jewish conspiracy. So do you think that the president is aware of what some people on the fringe are interpreting his words to mean?
I think he's aware of this issue. It's very clear. He watches a lot of cable news. There's been questions about this since his campaign. It's the final days of his 2016 campaign. He had an ad tying Hillary Clinton to what he suggested was some global conspiracy, and he named three other U.S. officials who also happen to be Jewish. Suggestions that he's appealing to this, that in some ways he condemns it, but other times he's appealing to conservatives, to extremist views, to sort of rally up and whip up public fears, and that can sort of drive folks to the polls and respond to his agenda, which tends to be a sort of a hard line on immigration, and obviously a sort of a law and order kind of point of view of how his administration will respond to potential threats of terrorism and other issues. And so that's been, something that's been around his campaign from the start. And now you're seeing that as we come to this midterm election, whether the president's going down that same path. The White House, as you said, continues to say, look, he's condemning this. But, in his rallies and his tweets just in the last few days, he continues to attack opponents, attack the media, even those who have been targets of some of the mail bombs.
Right. I mean, in his effort to drive a really hard line on immigration, there becomes a gray line between animus toward the immigrants themselves. Right. So, people keep asking if the president will tone down his rhetoric. But based on what we know about this presidency and how the president likes to, behave at the rallies, I mean, he's clearly in his element there. Is there really anyone who could convince him to change his messaging at this point?
I don't think so. The president, we've seen Sarah Sanders the White House spokeswoman, had a press briefing today, but she has not had very many. And the reason is because the president's doing most of his own talking. He's giving a lot of interviews, doing a lot of rallies. He's speaking in public quite a bit, and he shows no signs of toning it down. He said the other day, if anything, he wants to tone it up. He did not cancel a rally on Saturday in the wake of the mass shooting. Went forward with it. There's rumors that he's going to give an immigration speech. Could be quite strong and quite pointed in the next day or so. He is going to Pittsburgh. The White House said tomorrow with the First Lady he could offer more words of sort of unifying message. But I don't see over the next week or so before the voters go to the polls, the president's going to back off at all. And you saw the Pentagon sending 5,000 troops to the border. The president's going to be delivering his message, what the White House thinks is a strong one. And also, as Sarah Sanders said today, the president thinks he's just defending himself against what they say are these attacks from his opponents and from the press.
All right, we'll see his messaging moving forward. David Nakamura, thank you so much for your time.
Sure, anytime.